Two women from my neighborhood stopped me on my way home, and what started as a simple conversation turned into the night that changed everything. The evening had the kind of stillness that makes every small sound feel amplified. My footsteps echoed softly against the quiet street as I made my way home, the faint glow of street lamps casting long shadows on the pavement. The air carried a hint of warmth left over from the day, yet a coolness drifted in, brushing against my skin with the promise of night. It was the sort of walk where you expect nothing more than silence and solitude. But just as I turned the corner, I heard a voice call out, gentle, familiar. "Heading home already?" I slowed, glancing up to see them standing a few steps ahead. Two women I had known only in passing, neighbors whose presence was always felt but never truly explored. They were friends, close enough that you often saw them together, sharing quiet conversations on porches, laughing softly at the corner cafe, moving through the neighborhood with an ease that spoke of long companionship. Tonight, though, their presence felt different. They stood together under the warm halo of a streetlight, their expressions carrying a mixture of warmth and curiosity. One had her arms folded lightly, her posture relaxed but her eyes bright, studying me as if she had been waiting for this moment. The other wore a faint, almost playful smile, her head tilted in a way that made the simple act of standing there feel charged with something unspoken. I smiled back, trying to keep it casual. "Yeah, just heading in." But neither of them moved aside. Instead, one of them took a small step closer, her heels tapping gently against the pavement. "You always walk so fast," she said lightly, almost teasing. "As if you're afraid someone might stop you." The words landed with surprising weight. My chest tightened, not out of fear but from the strange awareness that they had stopped me, and now the night seemed to hold its breath around us. I noticed the little details, the way one brushed her fingers along her sleeve as though grounding herself, the subtle fragrance of her perfume drifting on the evening air, mingling with the other's softer, floral scent. Even their laughter, when it came, was low and smooth, blending into the quietness of the street like music just barely audible from an open window. "Maybe we just wanted to see if you'd slow down," the second woman added, her voice steady yet gentle. Her eyes lingered on mine longer than felt ordinary, and in that glance was something that made me pause, something that carried more than just neighborly politeness. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The street around us, empty and still, seemed to fade away until there was only the three of us standing there, the weight of the night pressing in close. Their presence felt both familiar and suddenly, inexplicably new. And though I could have continued on my way, I didn't. Something in the way they stood there, open, quietly insistent, told me this was no ordinary stop. For a moment, silence lingered between us, carried only by the soft hum of the street lamp overhead. I half expected them to smile politely and let me pass, the way neighbors often do, a brief exchange, nothing more. But instead, one of them shifted her weight, her expression thoughtful, almost mischievous. "You know," she said, her voice calm but deliberate, "it's far too early to head home. Why don't you come with us instead? Just for a little while." The suggestion caught me off guard. I glanced between them, uncertain whether they were serious. Their eyes held mine steadily, though, and in that gaze was something inviting, something that left me unable to simply laugh it off. The other woman smiled softer, her tone more coaxing. "We were just about to make tea, or maybe open a bottle of wine. You should join us. It's not often we catch you out here with no excuses to run away." Her words carried a playful lilt, but beneath it I sensed something more. A kind of curiosity. A desire to close the small distance that had always existed between us. I hesitated, my hands slipping into my pockets, trying to buy myself time. "I wouldn't want to intrude." One of them stepped closer then, closing that space with a lightness that felt almost deliberate. The faintest brush of her hand against my sleeve was enough to stop my thoughts mid-sentence. "You wouldn't be intruding," she said firmly, but with warmth. "We're inviting you." The touch was fleeting, but it left a trace, not just on my arm, but somewhere deeper, stirring the quiet inside me. The other tilted her head, her eyes glimmering with something unreadable, perhaps amusement at my hesitation. Besides, she added, you'll just be sitting alone at home anyway. Better to spend an hour with company. Her words landed with disarming simplicity. And maybe she was right. The night ahead had nothing waiting for me but silence, the kind of silence that swallows you whole. Yet here, in front of me, stood two women who seemed to hold the night differently, not as emptiness, but as possibility. The cool air brushed lightly against my neck, and I realized just how warm their presence felt in contrast. Their perfumes lingered in the air, blending in a way that was difficult to separate, like the overlap of two distinct but complementary notes. One floral, soft and steady, the other sharper, more daring. I exhaled slowly, the decision slipping from hesitation into inevitability. All right, I murmured, more to myself than to them. Their smiles widened, not triumphant but almost relieved, as though they'd been waiting for me to say it. One gestured with a graceful tilt of her head. Good. Come on then. And just like that, I was walking not toward home, but alongside them, drawn by a sense of quiet anticipation I couldn't quite explain. The night, which only minutes ago had felt so ordinary, suddenly carried the weight of something unknown, something just beginning. Crossing the short walk to their house, I felt the shift immediately. Outside, the night had been wide and open, filled with cool air and silence. But the moment we reached their porch, there was an intimacy I couldn't ignore. The soft creak of the wooden steps, the glow of a single lamp by the door, the way their shoulders brushed lightly against mine as we stood close together, all of it drew me inward before I even crossed the threshold. One of them unlocked the door with practiced ease, glancing back at me with a faint smile, as though checking to see if I was still certain about following. The other pushed the door open, her hand resting for a moment on the small of my back as if guiding me inside. That subtle touch, gentle, almost fleeting, sent a quiet shiver through me. Their home was warm in a way that felt lived in but carefully kept. The air carried a blend of candle wax, faint perfume, and something faintly sweet, maybe vanilla, maybe wine lingering from an earlier evening. The living room opened before me, softly lit by a lamp in the corner, its light pooling across a stack of books, a vase of fresh flowers, and a pair of wine glasses already set on the coffee table, as if they'd been expecting company all along. "Make yourself comfortable," one of them said, slipping off her shoes with an ease that made the space feel suddenly more intimate. She gestured toward the couch, wide, with cushions that looked too soft to resist. I hesitated for a moment at the doorway, not from discomfort but from the sense that stepping further meant stepping into something more than just a neighborly chat. Then I followed their lead, moving toward the couch. As I sat down, the cushions dipped under my weight, enveloping me in their warmth. The fabric carried the faint scent of lavender, the kind that clings quietly to a space over time. They joined me soon after. One settled on my right, close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against me without needing to touch. The other took the seat on my left, slightly angled toward me, her knee almost grazing mine. Their closeness wasn't overwhelming, but it made me acutely aware of every movement, the way their hair caught the light, the sound of their laughter when one of them made a quiet remark, the steady rhythm of their breaths as they settled in. Conversation began simply. Questions about work, about the evening, about nothing in particular. But there was something unspoken in the way their eyes lingered, how their smiles carried just a little more weight than casual friendliness. At one point, one of them leaned forward to pour wine into the glasses, the soft clink filling the room. She handed one to me, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. The other reached across the back of the couch, her arm resting there loosely, her shoulder leaning just close enough that I could feel the faintest warmth radiating through the air. And there, caught between them, I realized that this was no ordinary visit. The space itself seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as if the night had chosen to fold the three of us into a moment neither of us had planned but none of us wanted to end. The wine tasted smoother than I expected, a soft sweetness that lingered at the back of my throat. I held the glass loosely in my hand, not drinking much, more aware of the atmosphere around me than anything else. The lamp's glow painted the room in warm amber, casting gentle shadows that stretched across the walls. It felt like the kind of setting where people spoke honestly, where silence wasn't heavy but inviting, the kind of silence that asked you to fill it with something real. It was one of them who broke it first. She leaned forward slightly, setting her glass down on the table. Her fingers lingered at the rim, turning it slowly as if her thoughts were gathering in circles. "You know," she began, her voice softer now, "it's strange how quiet life becomes after certain chapters end. The house feels bigger, emptier. Even laughter sounds different." Her words carried a weight I hadn't expected. Her smile held, but it was thinner now, touched with the faintest edge of sadness. I felt her eyes on me, steady and searching, as though she wondered how much I might understand. The other woman shifted beside me, drawing her knees up slightly onto the couch. She gave her friend a small, supportive glance before speaking herself. "She's right. It's like, you spend so much time taking care of everything, people, responsibilities, routines, and then one day, you look around and realize you've been forgetting yourself." Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet vulnerability tucked between her words, like something she rarely admitted aloud. The room seemed to hold its breath with them. I didn't move, didn't interrupt, sensing that what they were offering wasn't just small talk, it was pieces of themselves, pieces that rarely left their lips. I nodded slowly, unsure if words would add anything but wanting them to know I was listening. And perhaps that was enough, because their shoulders eased slightly, as though simply saying it aloud had lifted something. The first woman gave a small laugh, though it was tinged with self-consciousness. "Sorry," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We didn't invite you in just to listen to us talk about heavy things." But I shook my head lightly. "No, it's not heavy. It's honest." That answer seemed to still her, her eyes softening in a way I hadn't seen before. For a brief second, the corners of her lips lifted in something more genuine, not playful, not guarded, but grateful. The second woman leaned a little closer then, her hand resting on my knee, meant perhaps as a casual gesture but carrying far more than that. Her palm was warm, her touch steady, grounding. "You listen differently than most," she said quietly. "Like you're actually here with us." Her words, her touch, the closeness of both of them, it all swirled together into something delicate, something almost fragile, but undeniable. The air between us no longer felt like neighbors exchanging stories. It felt like the start of truths they had long wanted to share, with someone who might actually see them. The conversation drifted naturally after their confessions, yet something in the room had undeniably shifted. It wasn't in what was said, but in what lingered between the words. Their laughter, when it came, was softer now, quieter, the kind of laughter that feels less like amusement and more like relief, a small release after bearing something vulnerable. I could feel the change most in the pauses. They weren't empty anymore, they carried weight, filled with a closeness that hadn't been there when I first walked in. Every glance, every shift in the cushions, every brush of fabric seemed amplified by the silence that followed. One of them reached forward to pour a little more wine into my glass. She didn't ask if I wanted it, she simply did, her hand steady, her eyes flicking briefly to mine as the liquid filled the curve of the glass. Her fingers brushed mine when she passed it back, and though the contact was fleeting, it stayed with me long after. The other leaned closer as she spoke, her voice lower now, almost as if the night itself had quieted around us. Her shoulder grazed my arm in the subtlest of ways, a contact so light it could have been accidental, except she didn't pull away. I could feel the faint warmth of her body there, steady and present, and it made the air between us hum with something unspoken. The lamp in the corner seemed dimmer now, as though the room had drawn tighter around us. Outside, the world was silent. No passing cars, no footsteps on the street. Only the occasional creak of the house settling into night. Inside, the stillness felt alive, charged with the awareness that something delicate was forming between the three of us. I noticed the details differently now, the way one woman absently traced her finger along the rim of her glass, her eyes flicking toward me more often than before. The way the other tucked her leg beneath her on the couch, leaning in slightly, her posture relaxed yet undeniably attentive. Their closeness made me aware of my own body, the way my hands tightened slightly around the stem of the glass, the way my breath felt a little slower, heavier, as if I were careful not to break the balance of the moment. It struck me then how natural it all felt, despite how unusual it should have been. This wasn't some orchestrated evening, wasn't something planned or prepared. It was simply unfolding, layer by layer, as if we had all been waiting without realizing it. When one of them laughed softly at something small, a comment about the week, a fleeting joke, the other leaned into me gently, her head tilting closer, as though to share the moment more directly. Her hair brushed my shoulder, and the light touch of it was enough to make my chest tighten. The shift was undeniable now. We were no longer three neighbors sharing wine on a quiet night. We were three people leaning into a closeness that felt both daring and inevitable, drawn together by something no one dared name just yet. The weight of the evening settled around us like a blanket, warm and steady. Time seemed to move differently, slower, stretched, as though the clock on the wall had agreed to stay quiet a little longer. Conversation dwindled into fragments, the kind where words were no longer the main thread holding us together. What mattered now were the pauses, the silences, and the way our bodies seemed to shift unconsciously closer. One of them set her glass down with deliberate care, her hand brushing against my arm as she leaned forward. She didn't move it quickly, didn't pull away as most people would when touch happens by accident. Instead, her palm rested there lightly, warm against the fabric of my sleeve, her thumb tracing an absent, almost invisible line as if testing what it felt like to remain. I froze, not from discomfort, but from the surge of awareness it brought. My breath caught in my chest. Every thought I had dissolved into the simple reality of her touch. The other woman noticed. She had been watching quietly, her chin resting in her hand as though studying both of us. When her eyes met mine, there was no teasing, no pretense of casualness. Only a quiet understanding. She shifted closer too, her knee brushing gently against my leg and staying there, the contact soft but unmistakable. Between the two of them, I felt enclosed, not trapped, but surrounded, as though the room itself had tightened to hold just us three. Their presence pressed in with a warmth that wasn't overwhelming but steady, like the slow rise of a tide. "See?" the first whispered, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You're still here. You didn't run." The words carried no accusation, only a softness, a kind of wonder. I exhaled slowly, my voice quieter than I intended. "I don't want to." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, her hand tightening just slightly on my arm as though sealing the moment. The other leaned in then, her shoulder brushing fully against mine, her laughter barely above a breath. "Good," she murmured, almost to herself. The air felt heavier now, rich with something fragile but undeniable. The ordinary boundaries of neighborly closeness had faded, and what remained was a simple, shared truth: none of us wanted to move away. I became hyper-aware of the little things, the faint rhythm of her thumb still moving against my sleeve, the way the other's perfume lingered so close I could almost taste it, the steady hum of their breaths weaving together with mine in the quiet room. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sudden gestures, no declarations. Only the slow, natural crossing of lines that felt less like breaking rules and more like finally acknowledging something that had been waiting quietly between us all along. For the first time that night, I let myself lean back, allowing the weight of their closeness to settle around me. And in that stillness I realized This wasn't an accident, nor a mistake. It was an unspoken choice, shared among us, unfolding gently in the dim glow of the lamp. The silence that followed felt different than before. It wasn't hesitant or uncertain anymore. It was calm, filled with the quiet assurance that none of us needed to say anything to explain why we were sitting the way we were. Their closeness no longer felt like chance. It felt chosen. One of them shifted first, setting her glass aside completely. She leaned back against the cushions and let her arms slip lightly across the back of the couch, resting just behind my shoulders. The movement was unhurried, natural, as though she'd been waiting all night for the right moment. The faint brush of her sleeve against my neck carried more weight than any words could. The other woman, sitting just as near, let out a soft laugh, not out of amusement, but out of recognition, as if she understood perfectly what was happening and had no desire to interrupt it. She leaned in too, her hand grazing my forearm before settling there gently, her touch grounding, steady. Between the two of them, I felt cocooned, surrounded not by tension anymore, but by a warmth I hadn't known I needed. We spoke less and less. The conversation faded into murmurs, small, almost irrelevant things that made us laugh quietly or nod in agreement. The weight of the night was no longer in the words but in the closeness, in the comfort of knowing that none of us wanted to pull away. At one point, the woman at my side let her head rest lightly against my shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it carried with it a tenderness that struck deeper than anything else that night. Her hair brushed softly against my jawline, and I could feel the faint rhythm of her breathing against me. It wasn't grand or dramatic, it was real, unguarded, and profoundly human. The other, watching from the other side, smiled faintly at the sight. Without hesitation, she shifted as well, her hands slipping gently over mine, fingers brushing against my knuckles until they rested there, laced just enough to let me know she wanted to stay connected too. In that moment, I realized it wasn't about choosing between them, or about lines crossed or roles broken. It was about something simpler, three people who, for reasons none of us needed to explain, had found in each other what we had been missing alone: closeness, belonging, and a quiet kind of affection that didn't demand anything more than presence. The room glowed faintly with the last light of the candle flickering on the table. The world outside felt impossibly far away, as though it couldn't touch us here. And as we sat together, their arms, their laughter, their warmth around me, I understood that this night wasn't about chance at all. It was about finding comfort where we least expected it, and holding on to it with gentle certainty. Not as neighbors anymore, but as something far more rare, companions bound by a moment that would stay with us, quietly, long after the night ended.